What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video this time. We are kind of taking this week off the PTS. I will be working on the PTS to make builds that will be released starting next week on Monday. But I won't be really testing anything on the PTS because I'll be too busy working out the new builds. So today we're going to be answering a question that I've been asked quite a few times. And this relates to magicka DPS and your Maelstrom backbar staff. I always have the question that pops up whenever I give advice on builds, whether that's on Discord or even on YouTube. I don't have an Inferno Maelstrom staff. I have either a Lightning or a Frost Maelstrom staff instead of the right trait. Would it be okay if I used a Lightning Maelstrom staff or a Frost Maelstrom staff instead of the Inferno that I have on all my build videos? And the short answer to that is yes, it's perfectly fine to use a Lightning Maelstrom or a Frost Staff Maelstrom. The thing is with the Frost Staff, just make sure you're not heavy attacking on the back bar, obviously, because you don't want to accidentally take taunt. So that's the only real caveat with running the Frost Staff Maelstrom back bar. But other than that, it is perfectly fine to run the Lightning and the Frost Maelstrom Staff. And I will pull up some DPS numbers so you guys can not just take my word for it, but also take the DPS parsed numbers. So one of the things that people are always concerned about or are asked questions about is why is it important to have that Inferno back bar? So besides just showing you the numbers, I'll also explain why the Inferno staff is actually the strongest, and also why Frost and Lightning are kind of not as strong, but still fairly good options. So this all pretty much boils down to the passives that you have under the Destruction Staff line. So in particular, you have the Ancient Knowledge passive, which increases certain damage, or I should say have different effects based on what staff you have equipped. So with Inferno staff, increases your single target abilities, your damage by 8%. Lightning staff increases your AoE abilities by 8%, the damage done. And then Frost staff gives you block mitigation. So obviously we can already tell right off the bat that Frost staff is going to be the lowest out of these three because it doesn't provide any sort of additional damage passives. See the same thing with Cryo Focus, with Flame Staff Heavy Attacks dealing 12% more damage, Shock Staff Heavy Attacks dealing 100% of the damage done to nearby enemies, and then the Frost Staff Heavy Attack is a taunt. So obviously Frost Staff is going to be the lowest on the list here because they don't have any passives that boost their damage. So it boils down to Fire versus Lightning Staff. So at this point it's pretty much, okay, they both increase abilities by 8%, one does a single target, one does AoE. Which one is going to be better? And then for this we need to turn to Unstable Wall of Elements or Elemental Blockade depending on which morph you're running. So the fire version deals additional damage to burning enemies. Frost reduces movement and immobilizes chilled enemies, and then Blockade, I should say Lightning, sets concussed enemies off balance. So we can see here that the flame version of this ability deals extra damage. So from that right off the bat we can tell that Inferno staff will do a little bit more damage than the Lightning staff because it is going to do some additional damage. At the very least the Blockade or Unstable Wall will do more damage as long as you have burning uptime, and because magicka DPS are pretty much always running an Inferno flame damage enchant on the front bar, you're going to have fairly good uptime on burning. Note too that burning does also account for burning that's applied by other people. So if you have a lot of magicka DPS that are all running flame damage enchants, you should have pretty good uptime overall on burning, so your Unstable Wall or your Elemental Blockade will be doing more damage. Well, what about off balanced? Magicka DPS in general do not run the Exploiter passive under the CP line, which gives you 10% additional damage to off balance enemies. Off balance itself does not provide any sort of damage increase outside of a little bit of additional damage onto your heavy attacks. I believe it increases the heavy attack damage you deal by 40%. Now you do not necessarily want to do a lot of heavy attacks unless your build is a heavy attack build, in which case you're a Magsork. Generally speaking, using heavy attacks is going to be DPS loss. The heavy attacks themselves, generally speaking, while they can hit for pretty decent amount, you are typically going to be giving up 2 global cooldowns in general, usually sometimes 3, depending on how things kind of fall in place here, but you're giving up 2 global cooldowns. So you're basically giving up 2 light attacks and 2 abilities, essentially, to use a heavy attack. And that The 4 abilities that you're giving up, the 2 light attacks and 2 abilities, usually adds up to more damage than what your heavy attack is able to give you. So heavy attacking in general is going to be a DPS loss. So even though off balance does give you a little bit more damage on on your heavy attacks, that combined with the off balance immunity and the cooldown doesn't really make off balance very useful. So. But then we kind of get into the situation where we go back to the Ancient Knowledge passive, and it's basically, okay, Flame Staff increases single target abilities, Lightning Staff increases AoE abilities, Blockade's an AoE ability, so it should be boosting that. Now, for this, we're going to really quickly turn over here, and I'm going to equip a Lightning Staff on the back bar, an Inferno Staff on the front bar here, just so I keep the bonuses the same on both bars. We're going to take a look at the tooltip for Blockade. So you can see that with the Lightning Staff on the back bar, we're sitting at 833 damage every second. If we swap to our front bar, so this is the Inferno Staff, that does end up going up a little bit to 859. That is because of a certain passives that we have on the front bar here. So on the back bar, we don't have Inner Light, for example. So we're missing 7% max magicka, which ends up boosting the damage up here. So we're actually ending up doing a little bit more damage on the front bar here, even though we're on an Inferno Staff. So even with the additional 8% damage here, we're not getting that much more. Another good example to kind of take a look at here would be Twisting Pass. On the back bar, this is the Lightning Staff, we're dealing 2212 every second. On our front bar here, we're doing 2149, so a little bit less on our front bar here. So if we're still using the Inferno Staff on the front bar, that Ancient Knowledge passive that we get from having the Lightning Staff is only going to be active while we're on our back bar. You will be spending most of your time on your front bar here, so the additional AoE damage that you're getting on your back bar if you're running a Lightning Staff will only be active while you're on your back bar. The other thing too is, for your back bar, you're still light weaving, and those still get affected by your Ancient Knowledge passive. So you're still getting 8% additional light attack damage if you have an Inferno Staff on your back bar. So there's a lot of things that go on when you're talking about fire versus lightning staff on your back bar Maelstrom. Now in terms of damage, they're all very similar to each other. So this one here is the Frost Staff back bar, so we're dealing 78.1k. This one here is the Lightning Staff, so a little bit higher, 79.2k here. So here you see Unstable Wall of Storms. And this is the Inferno Staff, so 80.8k. So you see with each jump up, we're jumping a little bit around 1k, a little bit over 1k bonus each. But the actual DPS difference is pretty small in general. So even with the Frost Staff, we're only losing about 2k DPS or so, which is definitely noticeable. We're talking about 2.5% decrease, roughly speaking, of DPS. With the Lightning Staff, you're losing about 1k DPS, so a little bit over 1%, at the very least on a magicka Nightblade. Obviously, these numbers will be a little bit different depending on a specific class. So you can see here that you can use a Lightning Staff and you're losing pretty minimal DPS. 1%, 1.5%, that's not really that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. So if you don't have an Inferno Staff Maelstrom, if you don't have an Inferno Maelstrom Staff, all you have is a Lightning Staff, go with that. Even with a Frost Staff, you're still pulling pretty good DPS, 78.1k here. It's more about being able to master your rotation. The only thing I will caution with the Frost Staff back bar is don't heavy attack if you have the Tri-Focus passive, because you might accidentally taunt the boss. You don't necessarily want to do that. So that's the only thing I would caution against if your only option is to run a Frost Staff on the back bar. Of course, the best is going to be the Inferno Staff, but in a pinch, you can go Lightning or Frost. So hopefully that kind of clears things up concerning the Maelstrom Staff elemental type on the back bar. In general, any of them are good options. It's more important to master your rotation than it is, the specific staff that you have on your back bar Maelstrom Staff. That concludes this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.